Welcome back, everybody. Today we're gonna cover the last part. Well, there are gonna be more parts after this, but if you are a passerby who's just taking a look at how to implement authentication with identity server and authorization parts, this will be probably the last journey for you, right? So today we're gonna take a look at authorization and basically having different roles as well, right? So we're gonna do the typical user and moderator. So our identity server lives on the same side as our API. As we've seen in the previous episode, to get the code from identity server, we are hitting the /connect/authorize endpoint, which is actually authorized, which is the thing that actually puts us on the login screen. So after we log in, we go back to the endpoint, grab a code, go back to our client, exchange the code. Okay. So identity server allows you to extend the endpoints and basically apply that same authorization. Okay. So think of this as we're extending identity server with our application. Okay. So let's go to startup, and right at the bottom here, what we are going to do after the if statement, because this is going to be true for everything, we're going to take services and we're going to add local API authentication. That's it. All right, so what does local API authentication does for us? If you're in Visual Studio or VS Code, I'm not sure you will be able to see this, but here's the source code, the the decompiled version, what's actually contained, what's the code behind. Well, there are two parts. First one is we add authentication, where an expected scope is this scope. We will dive in a little bit deeper into this in a second, but the second bit is authorization. So here we have a policy with a specific name. So right, identity server constants, local API policy name. If we go in here, we can see it's the authentication schema identity server access token. And if I go back, that's basically the name of the policy. So if we're going to put an authorized tag somewhere to authenticate with our access token, this is the bit that we want to use. Now, let's take a quick look at the add local API. And right now, what I'm just gonna note before we actually dive in there, the policy name is the authentication schema name. We go back, the identity server constants local API authentication schema name, it's the exact same thing. Okay, so the thing that we are adding here and we're adding here is basically registering it with the same name. And add authentication schema is the authentication part. So this is how we recognize who the user is. So add local API, if we jump to it, it's just a bunch of convenient functions that go on and on until they add a schema. And again, if you look at my more advanced deep dive, I think it's episode 3 or 4, where I really go into how to add your authentication schemas. This part, all it does is specify some options and provides a handler. So what do we actually do with how do we recognize the user and how do we load the information about him? So the authentication schema here is specified as well. So let's jump back a little bit, right? Here with the add local API, again, the schema that is getting passed here is the authentication schema. So all we're doing up here is we're saying authorize only the users that are passing this authentication schema and make sure that they're authenticated. So it kind of plays together, okay? And down here in the add schema, again, local API authentication handler, we can F12 and we can take a look at the implementation. And again, coming down to the actual function that matters, just to kind of go over it so you understand what happens in the background. We have the token just as a kind of container. This is where the token's meant to be. We grab the authorization header. That's how we are basically going to attach the token. And then we kind of validate that. We separate the bearer, and do we basically check, does it start with a bearer, because that's the authentication schema. If it doesn't, then we basically say you can't be here, or the token will not get populated. And then we actually check the token, and then we are using the token validator service to validate the token. And you can always be like, where does this token validator comes from? Well, if you scroll up, and you will have the token validator here injected and assigned, right? So it's a service provided by Identity Server, something you can use wherever you want in your application to validate your token, okay? So coming back, we got the token validation result. If it's not a valid token, that means somebody has tampered with the payload or the header and the signature doesn't match those. So we passed that. The other two parts, or the other part, is essentially creating the claims principal. This is essentially extracting the information from the token and turning it into the user that is going to be shown in the HTTP context.user, okay? And then we actually go forward to save the token and use claims transformations to transform the claims, right? And the claims transformation is how the HTTP context.user gets populated. This is just kind of a intermediate object to pass that information into the claims transformation. One important thing here to kind of notice with this token validator is that we are expecting to have a specific scope, right? So in options, expected scope, if we take a look at this, it's something that's going to be configured in the options to validate the token, right? So we need to have a scope that we're going to request. With that information, I might use this for reference a little bit more, but we're going to close all of this, and that's basically the unpackaging of that function. Let's go ahead, add a couple of more steps to allow authorization. Like all of that stuff is registering that authentication handler. It's a class that's just with a function that is a service that needs to be consumed somewhere. And generally our services are consumed within our middleware. And here where I said auth here, let's not forget, use authorization. Okay, so adding that, the part that I have said in the add local API authentication, where if we go down into add local API and all the way down here, again, back into the local authentication handler, where from the options, it grabs the expected scope. If we go back again, I appreciate I'm jumping between files here. Stay focused. In the options here, where we register here, the first line that you will see is options expected scope. This is the part where we're actually basically adding a scope. And again, I'll repeat this same because this is, a lot of people find this hard. So if you're a special one who is like, I understand this, just get on with it, you probably would have implemented this already. So anyway, the scope, as I explained before, is a region, or a region, a location, an amount of information that you can request. The amount of information that is hidden by our identity server, like the authorized endpoint where we can retrieve the code, or perhaps user information where we need to pass the token to extract the information about the user who is currently holding the token. This particular scope is protecting whatever information we choose to extend the identity server with, okay? So what we actually need to do is allow the client to request this scope, right? So we want to be able to have the client get the scope and use it. So let's go ahead and see how we can do this. Pretty much the same as how we can say that you can request data about the user itself. There's also going to be some data on the API. And the way that you define what kind of scopes are for API as opposed to your user information is through API scopes, okay? So in our identity server builder, let's go ahead and add in-memory API scopes. And in here, we will have an array, okay? And in here, let's go ahead and create a new API scope. And here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go into the local API authentication extension. I'm gonna go ahead and grab the scope name. And if we go to it, I know it's IdentityServer.api or Identity Server API, there are no dots there. It's just so when I go to my web client, I know what I'm going to put there, okay? I'm just going to go in there, copy the name, and put it there. So this is what I put here. The API scope initializes a new instance of the API scope, but that doesn't mean anything unless you know what it means in the context of Identity Server. And all that does is allows you to request this scope, and for Identity Server, it means there is going to be some kind of resource behind this scope, okay? And again, when I'm saying resource, think about data. And when I say scope, think about some kind of area where the data is located. You can think about secure data, where an area might be a safe, and in that safe, the data in terms of physical representation could be like money, a gun, I don't know, cocaine if you're a gangster with a safe, you know, that kind of stuff. So since we have added the scope, let's go ahead and add the scope to the allowed scopes. And now what I want to do is I want to request the same scope, the same as we request the other two scopes. So again, I'm going to press F12 here. I'm going to copy the actual string behind the scope. I'm going to go into my index page in my pages, right? So this is where we had the login button. And what I'm going to do in the scopes that I'm requesting, I'm also going to request Identity Server API. And again, these are all the resources hidden behind our API, okay? And the scope is going to be specifically for the policy that's protecting it, okay? So we got that. Another thing before actually diving in and doing this, what I'm going to do is implement some logic that is going to be attaching the token to Axios so we can actually authorize, right? So first, let's get an endpoint that we are going to hit, and then we're going to attach the token, okay? So let's go into controllers, moderation item controllers, or let's actually do something a little bit easier. So trick, I'm going to go ahead and grab this one. I'm going to put one here to start with. I'm going to go ahead and authorize it, and policy here, we are going to need to set it to something. But for now, the route itself, I'm going to just call, test. I think test is fine. So test auth, we are going to return a string, and the actual string that we're going to return is, let me say test, okay? So which policy do we specify? If we go into startup, again, local authentication, the policy name is, well, this. Let's go ahead and specify this here. And in a minute, because we're going to add moderation policy as well, you're going to know how to essentially create proxies if you don't want to specifically use this policy name, okay? So here we have an authorized endpoint. Let's go ahead and I'm going to close most of the stuff here back into the index.view. And once we log in, we console log the user. What I want to do is, because I already know that this is happening, you can go ahead and try to log in, and I think actually let's go for the process because this might be a little bit confusing. So maybe if you see me do it, you might have a little bit of an easier time. So first of all, go into application, a bunch of stuff in here. Make sure you clear it, make sure you're fresh, you're not authenticated. Okay, now that we're here, let's go ahead, log in, test, password, we log in, let's go into console. We have the information from the user. Here we can see the access token. Grab the property, right? Let's go to this, Axios. The function is set token. Again, if you had the time to go read the documentation, you would have known that this is here. One thing that we'll need to do is do like a fully qualified thing. So that means including the token type. So it's bearer. And then we add the access token, which comes from the user. Okay, so this is when we authenticate. We can also do this if we have the user manager authenticated, but I don't think I should be diving there. However, actually, let's do this. So let's go ahead and create a const, or rather, we will just use the promise. So this user manager we'll call get user. This is, again, you can have 12. This is a promise. What we're going to do is something, what we are going to get is something similar to sign in redirect, where we're just going to have a user, right? So this is only going to get triggered if we are signed in. So what we'll have to do is say, if we have user, go ahead and do the same thing, okay? So let's go ahead and put this around here and console.log, and we'll say user from storage for now. And we'll put user here, right? So we kind of know where do we actually get the access token from when we're refreshing our application, right? So let's clear this. If we hit F5, we should be able to get our user from storage, and then Axios is going to set the access token here. So it is also possible to kind of like comment this out. Let's go ahead and make an API call, and I will provide an, let's put an X here because we are going to change this endpoint in a second. So return this Axios, and we are going to try and get, and we are going to, let's see, API, tricks, and test, or rather not test, sorry, the actual endpoint. And then we are going to grab the then. It's going to be some kind of message response, and we're just going to console log it. Okay, and we'll put the message here. So this API call, let's go ahead and call it here. For now, we're calling test, and API test auth, right? So because I commented out the token attachment, we are still console logging it, but bear in mind that we're not putting it on the Axios instance. So I'm going to control F5, and the thing that I'm after here is when I call this API test auth, I'm expecting to actually get an error response. So let me just remove the slash from the beginning here. I think that was the problem around it. Other than that, let me just double check this part, and let's try this again. Okay. So here we get the 401. Cool. So we're not authenticated. Let's go ahead and try the same, but again, we'll just set the access token. And the interesting thing here will be, because we've reloaded the backend, the signing key should have rotated. So what's actually going to happen is we are going to fail again, right? So this is just when you run into this issue, you're not like, it's not authenticated. Chill out. If the backend application restarts, you need to clear, right? You need to log out. So the way we log out, because we don't have the actual mechanism, we clear the state, we refresh, because we put if statements, nothing crashes, right? We press login again, test, password. We are now in sync, right? We get the ID or the user record from the callback. Let's go ahead, test the API test auth, and we get the test message back. So we're authorized as a regular user. Let's go ahead, add a moderated user, and do that same thing. Okay, and we're just gonna double check that this user is not able to enter the mod endpoint, and the mod user will be able to enter that endpoint. Okay, so again, we're gonna go into the startup first, and we're gonna go into add API local authentication. I'm gonna scroll all the way down because, or actually not all the way down, to where they add authorization, because we kind of want to follow suit. They're using this to authorize their bearer tokens. We want to grab this same thing, but extend it slightly. Okay, so let's go ahead, grab this. We're gonna go into startup, and at the bottom here, we're gonna go ahead and add this. However, for the policy that we are adding, we're going to go into options, we're going to add policy, and what we're going to do is we're going to call this mod policy. Okay, this policy is going to be consisting of the following, right? So this is still a builder function, and we need to build this policy up. The cool thing about this is that we can actually get a policy from within here. So we can get the identity server policy, like policy, or rather not in policy, but rather options, get policy. And in here, when we get the policy, let's go ahead, supply this one, right? So we're getting the previous policy, and we're just saying, right, our policy, combine it with the IdentityServer4 policy. So we're on the same footing here. Now, just, give it one level higher, right? In the policy, we're going to say require claim, and let me scroll all the way down here. What kind of claim? I'm going to go with a simple role claim, and I'm going to say you will need to be a moderator. Okay, that's all. We don't need to add anything else because that previous one is already kind of working. So again, as I said before, we're kind of just adding a little bit onto it. Let's get a moderator user, same way that we get our previous user, get the moderator user, right? So let's get this thing here. We're gonna call a mod, a login mod, a password will keep the same. And one thing that we want to do here is for the manager, add claim async. We want to do the same kind of thing where we get a waiter, get result, and as always, you can inspect what this function is actually accepting, which is tuser and a claim. So in our case, the user is mod. Let's not forget to change it here, otherwise we're going to be creating two users. It's not a good time when you kind of like copy pasta and then forget to change stuff. So what's the claim, right? Well, we already kind of defined the claim. So claim types, a role, and we want to call it mod. So one thing that you might want to catch yourself when you're doing this sort of thing is what you have for what Identity Server is doing. The guys that made Identity Server is they're doing something very slick and nice. They have a constant, a string, and they're allowing you to use it, right? And you see here we're just sprinkling magic strings. These are called magic strings. You're just kind of expecting them to be, aligned, right? And the same thing with the claim types. These are well-known claim types, and they're just constant strings. Although the things, like, if you recognize that things are sort of aligning, try to do the same things that you think are actually nice, and I think this is a nice solution. So for now, let's go ahead and say public, static, and we're going to create a struct because I think it's maybe lightweight, I'm not sure. And we're going to say tricking library constants, right? And in here, I know we can't get static because the struct is immutable data structure kind of thing, right? But anyway, public, or in writer we have PCS, public const string, where we can call a mod, and this can be, again, a public struct, and we will call it policies. Yeah, we will move this up here, just making sure, and name of mod. There we go, right? So now when you want to be sprinkling out these ones, tricking library constants, policies, mod policy. This is what we're expecting to have, right? And what you can do is you can actually, the way that we're creating this one here, you can remove the required claim type. You can just pretty much kind of copy their policy, and then you can do other stuff to like override it, but essentially just use notations for it. But I think that's a little bit of a, you need a justification for that. I don't actually have one, right? So this is how we would use a policy, and let's go ahead, copy this. If we have any other policies or roles, again, this thing will kind of be the same, right? So tricking the library, actually, I'm just gonna copy this whole thing, put it here, and use roles instead. Okay, same thing I'm gonna do in the program when I seed my user, and when I create, let me jump down here and I'll put this to new line so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, and the same thing that I will do here. So we add the claim. When we add the new claim, we use the role from the claim types and the moderator role that we are defining ourselves right here. Okay, now let's go ahead and put this on an endpoint. So how we had the tricks controller, and actually before we go and do that, let's remove, there is no need to have that thing twice because it's already there. We kind of copied it there to be able to see it as a reference, okay? So going back to the tricks controller, let's go ahead and do the same thing here. So test auth, and here we'll say mod auth. What I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna say mod, and here, you might have guessed it, tricking library constants, policies mod. Oh, no, yeah, this one. Easy, easy authentication in .NET Core with IdentityServer. After this video, you can go and take consultancy fees. So, we go into our console. Application is reloaded. That means the token in our application, well, in our browser is invalid. Log out, and let's do this again, right? So going to the index page, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second button. We're going to put mod here, and we're going to API mod auth, right? So format this a little bit. Let's refresh this. So just to kind of prove a point, we go, our token is expired, right? So going back here, let's go to application. We're clear, refresh. We're going to try to go log in again. Okay, we're going to go as test, password, sign in. We're back here, like right in the console, all good. API test auth, we're authenticated, mod 403, unauthorized, right? So 401 would be not authenticated, so that means token's invalid, so we don't know who you are. 403 means unauthorized, we know who you are, you're not allowed, okay? Coming back here, what we will need to do is log out again. Again, we don't have a log out button. It's coming in the future episodes. Right, coming back here, this error again, same as in the previous episodes, because we have this code here. We are going to take care of that, don't worry. Going to the login page, now we're going to actually need to log in as moderator, and again, because the sign out bit is not working as precisely, we're just going to reset the backend again to kind of, because we're signed in on the identity server by restarting the application like so. When it's in watch run, it's gonna flush the signing tokens, and we are no longer gonna be authenticated there. So now I'm gonna log in as mod. So login, mod, password, and this isn't gonna work, by the way, and I'm gonna actually explain why, right? So and this is just for your benefit, because there are going to be a lot of issues when you're going to be doing these, and you're going to be like, wow, why is it not working? So I'm just giving you tools to basically how to debug, right? So API test auth works, no problem. API mod 403, oh no, what is going on? Right? Do not fret. This is what you do. First thing that you can do is you can check the logs and try to look for something that says anything in terms of why are you not allowed. So in our case, there aren't too many logs here. The primary lead of the issue is we are unauthorized. So what is the condition for being authorized? The scope that we are requesting a access to the API resource. Well, we know we got that because we can hit the test endpoint, so we know that the extension for the identity server is working. For the mod, we need a claim, right? Where are claims stored? In the profile, right? Of the it's meant to be contained in the access token. So let's go ahead to do this. We're gonna grab the access token. We're gonna go to JWT.io, and what you do is you place your access token here. So remove the quotes for all intents and purposes. And what you're gonna notice here is role is nowhere to be found. So the thing that we're requiring isn't actually here. So to understand what is going on here, in program.cs, let me close this one. When we add the claim, we add it on the identity side. We need to tell identity server to actually put this claim from the identity side into the access token, okay? And the way that you do this, if you Google around, if you look around, if you're like, oh, how do you do this, right? You're gonna find the answer. But essentially in the API scopes, what you can do is you can have a second constructor, and you can read this is something that I do sometimes. I just don't even Google, I just basically look through the classes that I'm using already. And this is why I think Writer is pretty good in this, because it actually gives you the decompiled version as well, so you can take a look at the source code. But here we'll say a list of associated claims that should be included when this resource is requested, right? So All right, let's add the associated claims, right? In the startup, let's what's our claim? Role, right? If we go back to API resources, right? It should be a new array of strings, and in here we'll just specify our claim types role. So this should now be included. Okay, so we add this. Coming back to our application again, I'm gonna go to the application. I'm gonna clear this. I'm gonna refresh. I'm gonna go to the login. Again, I'm gonna log in as mod, password, save. And now what we can do is we can go to the console and straight up just start with seeing if we've actually solved the previous issue, right? And here, what you will see is, I mean, this looks a little bit wonky because the claim for some reason is like 10 miles long. Microsoft, I mean, this is the part where maybe we don't want to use claim types. We can just, you know, put role in there like a normal person. But essentially, we can see the claim is in there now. All right. So essentially, if we try to call API mod, we will be able to call it, right? As many times, both work. So we are now a moderator. Now, let's just verify that the test user doesn't get this. Let's go to the application, flush this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a space here and reset the backend so it ejects me from there. It's opening another tab, deleting the cookie on there, you know. It's a long road. Okay, so refreshing, logging in. Gonna log in as test. Password. Go to console. There's our authentication state. Test the API. Test the mode. Unauthorized. So, I mean, there you have it. Essentially, simple authentication, having API and identity server as one application, extending the identity server authentication. Essentially, you're extending the identity server API with a little bit more functionality, still using that identity server authentication and authorization mechanisms, but internally. But essentially here you have two different roles. So this is how I go about implementing this and my tips. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe. Again, check the playlist. I'm going to leave it in the description for all Auth related episodes. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section. I also stream on Wednesdays and Sundays, so come say hi. Sometimes I do secret morning Saturday sessions, and only people who join my Discord know. Alright, so don't forget to join that as well, and I'll see you in my other episodes.